Hello CSAEers, it's Steve Trustrom for our CSAE Manager of Content here, and this is episode 5 of Conquering Content. We're going to be talking about website design and optimization today, and this is an important topic. It's one that's usually undervalued, especially with associations and not-for-profits, where you might see a lot more outsourcing in website design functions and the like than you might see in a business. So the reason why website design optimization is important is because it knocks back on just about everything else that's going back or that's occurring on your website. Whether you're providing information, whether you're registering for events, whatever you're doing on your website, the optimization is key. And like I said, it's something that's often overlooked. It was one of the first things I did when I came to CSAE is I audited the website for things that were weaknesses and vulnerabilities and areas where optimization was necessary. And this is actually a very lengthy discussion. There's a lot of things that go into website optimization, so I'm just going to give a general overhead on several key points, things that are also very easy for you to tackle on your own, because I don't know about you, but I'm hungry, and as it is noon on July 13th, I want to get this done and go get some food, and I'm sure you do too. So let's just start at the beginning. Anything you do online begins with its foundation, and that is the website design. So if you don't have a good website design, it's not optimized, everything else is going to suffer for it. So it's very important that you look into this. It affects how fast your site runs. It affects usability, how easy it is for people coming to your website to navigate around. All of that stuff is a part of website optimization. And it's important to test your website optimization when you do, especially a radical change where you change how it looks, you add a new feature, maybe you've added a storefront or something. Any major change requires that you test it extensively. If possible, do A/B testing. A/B testing is when there's one or more A or B version of your website, and they're served up in sequence. So one person visiting your website gets version A, and the other person gets version B, and then that information is collected on how the site performs and is received by A and B. So if you have a higher bounce rate on B overall after testing for a while, that indicates that the B design is not retaining people. It's people come in and finding it difficult to navigate maybe, and they're leaving. So you can't get A/B testing services. You can pay for them instead of having it built into your website. You can pay for them. It's worth doing. You also want to test on a browser and mobile. So you always want to, especially when you add a new module, for example, or you change your theme or your appearance in radical ways, you really want to test that on a mobile device as well to see how it's going. And that'll just take us into one of the first aspects of optimizing a website, and something that's really, it's a really easy thing to correct, but a lot of websites don't do it. And CSAE is not excluded from this. When I came on board, CSAE had a big problem with this, and that is image optimization. And the reason why image optimization is important is because when you get a lot of images on a website that aren't optimized, it increases load time for the website. So an instance of this is that sponsors at the bottom of the CSAE webpage, when we had a sponsor come in, they would send us a logo, and we put it on the bottom of the main page saying, here's our sponsors. And a lot of associations will use this. They have sponsors, especially when it comes to events. So they take this logo, they put it on their website, and I mean us as well as CSAE, and they just put it as it was given. So typically when a sponsor hands over a logo, it's not the guy who's sending you the email who's doing the negotiations with you as your point of contact. It's their graphics person. So that your point of contact goes to their graphics person and says, I need to send a logo to CSAE because we're one of their sponsors now, and they need to put it on the website. So the graphics guy goes, okay, sends the logo, and it's the big logo, it's the master logo, the one that they use. It's huge, it's at high definition. It's very large, because it's easy to shrink something down and retain its appearance, but if you have a small image and you want to make it big, it starts to look blocky and everything. So the master image is always large and high definition. So they send this to us, and then that logo was then put online and made to look very small. So what you're seeing on the website is this tiny little logo that's maybe an inch across, but what happens is the file, if you looked at it in Photoshop, is like this big. So an image that's like this wide is being displayed at that size. Now the display is smaller, but the actual file is the same size, so it could be like 3 megabytes or more in size for something that big. And that's being served up to your browser or to your smartphone or whatever, and it's got to process that in order to view everything else that comes after it in the code. So if you're like us and you have sponsors at the bottom, there's like 10 sponsors, if every image was like this, when you come to the website, it's got to churn through all of these images, regardless of how it's being displayed. That 3 megabyte or whatever image has to be sent to you, and that takes time and that takes bandwidth. So you got to optimize your website, your images for web viewing. Now, if you're using Photoshop, there's an actual there's a function in there called Save for Web. And in the latest version of Adobe, it's actually a legacy now, so it's not as obvious as it used to be. But it used to be under Save As, and you go Save for Web, and what it does is you have a lot of web optimization options, whether it's PNG, JPEG, whatever. And what this does is it strips out all of the meta code, all the stuff that's really just inflating and blowing up the size of that image. It takes all that stuff out, and it then leaves you, you can resize it. So think about it, if your monitor is, resolution is set to like 1,900 whatever pixels wide, you don't need an image that's 5,000 pixels, right? So on CSAE, we have a main column down the middle that's about 800 pixels wide. So there's never a need for an image that's more than 800 pixels. And that's what we always think of. It's 800 pixels wide. We want the logo to be maybe a third of that. So, you know, maybe 250 pixels wide or something like that. No bigger than that. So you can actually shrink it down using this function. And like I said, so all of a sudden your 3 megabyte file is now like less than 10% of that. So that means it loads up 90% faster, right? Like that 90% is gone. So just it zooms through, and it'll look the same. Now, another part of optimizing your images is a lot of software for websites. When you load images up through the interface, is it assigns the default value of height and width. So if your image is 400 pixels wide, and that's what you upload, when you look in the code, it will say, you know, here's your image, the code for your image, and then it will say this image with 400 pixels, because it inherently does that. It reads the pixel width and puts it in. Now the problem with that is it's not what it's called a scaled image, and you want a scaled image for optimization, because again, say we had this the main column on CSAE's website is 800 pixels wide, but when you go on mobile, as I'm sure you're familiar with, when you view a website on mobile, it changes the appearance. And that column is no longer 800 pixels wide. But if we had an image there that said 800 pixels, what you have on the mobile device is that image pushes to the right off of your mobile device's screen. And I'm sure you've seen this where you'll be scrolling down and all of a sudden you can move to the side now. And that's because it's got something in there with what's called a static dimension. It doesn't change for the screen size. You've said, I want this image at 800 pixels wide. It'll stay at 800 pixels wide no matter the size of your screen. Whether it's your browser size or your mobile device, it'll always try and push that through at 800 pixels wide. So what you want to do is, if you wanted that full 800 pixels, for example, you would say width equals 100%. So what you're telling it is, no matter the size of the screen, you want that image 100% width, and then remove the height, because what happens with a scaled image is that it always maintains that ratio. Whatever the width is at the percentage, it sticks it out at the height that you want it to be relative to the image's width. So say it's a 400 pixel image and you say you want it at 50%, so it's 200, and it was 100 high, it would then become 50. You know, it does the same 50-50. It sounds complex, but it's really simple when you see how it works. And why you want scaled images is, again, it maintains the look of your website as you want it. If you wanted that image halfway across that column, it'll stay halfway across that column no matter how big the column becomes. And this is important for mobile devices because you won't have that float to the right thing. It'll always be 50% of the screen or the column. So scaled image is very important for regular website design, but it is essential if you want your content, your website to be mobile ready. If you want it to look how you know how it's expected to look, you have to use scaled images. Set the width to percentage. Stop using the exact pixel count. Okay, even if you leave out the width, it'll go to the default. So if you don't have a width designation in the code at all, it'll still by default push it out to the full width, and it won't be mobile responsive. So that's important for website optimization. Another thing about website optimization, let's talk about, because I was talking about how the sponsors are on the home page, what your home page should be doing if you want to optimize it. This is not speaking about code, it's talking about content. To optimize usability is that your home page should be as static as possible. Don't have your home page changing all the time. Keep the content regular. It's important for SEO purposes so that your message is always being indexed the same. So if you're constantly changing that, it's the indexing is always going to keep changing. Google's going to keep looking at it, going to say the keywords are keep changing. So you can never really push your SEO value and get good search engine results consistently because you're always going for different keywords. So keep your message on your homepage the same, and then use that to push into other areas of the website that you can keep more dynamic, like a blog, a news post, your events stuff. Now CSAE's website, for example, when you first come on, there's the text there that says this is what CSAE does, here's what our mission statement is, here's what we offer in terms of events, conference, and stuff like that. That is largely static. It doesn't change. I wrote that probably in my first month here last year, so it's been about like September of 2016, and minus a couple of tweaks and changes, that big block of content has stayed the same for almost a year. Now there's stuff changing around it. When we see that you scroll down a bit, there's 3 images that saying, these are events that are going on, be they webinars or whatever. These are things that are going on at CSE. No, those change. So you can have some content change on your homepage because that's not really, it's a title and an image. So it's not really lending a lot of weight to your SEO. It's that big core block of content that you really have to keep static unless your message is changing or you've decided, you know what, these keywords we've chosen aren't really working, or we've really gone as far as we can with these and we need to change it up. Then of course change it. But by and large, keep your home page, the main content static. Don't change it too often. Also talking about usability, let's go into the F pattern and Z pattern of viewing. Where you put your content and where you put your menu, all your ads, everything like that is incredibly important to website optimization from a usability perspective. So the F pattern of viewing is the idea, and this is I'm gonna do it in reverse here so it'll look normal for you from your perspective. The F pattern is, you start on a website here and then you go across and then you go back and you go down and across and back and down and across and back. So that's how a lot of websites are viewed. It looks like an F, and this has all been verified via eye tracking studies and the like. If you see a lot of heat maps, put in Google F pattern heat maps, and you'll see that this has all been tested. And this is important for, it's used in articles, e-commerce websites, menus. A lot of stuff like that is where the F pattern of viewing is most prevalent. It's most viewers, this is how they look at a website. And this is why you'll see menus for a website are usually put on the left-hand side. It increases navigation because people are most consistently spending their time on the left-hand side. They return to the left-hand side of a website. So menus on the left hand are more useful than menus on the right side of a website. It's easier for people to get to. Also, if it's on the right side, then people have to move their eyes across the content to get to it. and that's wasted time, because then if they actually want to read the content, they got to go back. And it all seems like, well, it's a couple of seconds, but that starts to add up. So F pattern is very important for many sites. Now, if it's your content, if your website is very content light, say it's visually oriented, there's very little written word, there's not a lot to look at, it's very, it's very Spartan, it's very sparse. Then you might get the Z pattern, which is, and again, let's do the reverse. So you get back across. Okay, so someone starts on the left side, reads across, goes down, goes back, and these patterns repeat. So that the Z pattern is if you're, there's not a lot going on your website, or if it's very visually oriented. So that's important to keep in mind, depending upon what you're doing with your website. Keep that pattern in mind with how it's functioning, because that saves time. And why is time important? Well, think about it. How much time do you like spending there watching a website load? Like, if it doesn't load pretty quickly, most people will be like, there must be something wrong. The assumption is there's something wrong with the website, right? Because it's the era of high-speed technology. Why should you be waiting? So the ideal time for a website to load is under 4 seconds. If a website is taking longer than 4 seconds, the drop-off on traffic just plummets. People just leave. That's how low people's expectations are. They want your website in 4 seconds or less these days. The next benchmark for that is about 8 seconds. So those people who are like, well, maybe I'll just wait. If they get to 8 seconds, again, traffic just plummets again. And then you're really just hoping for the holdouts who just really, really want to see what you've got on your website. So keep that in mind. If your website's taking longer than 4 and then 8 seconds, you really got to do some optimization. You've got to do a site audit and find out why your website is taking so long. Do you have bloated code? If you have a lot more code on your website when you look in the source code than you have content, that's a problem. That means your website is so busy doing stuff that is not necessary to, it's not essential to delivering the information. Then that's time that the site is spending loading, it's running stuff, it's doing functions, it's loading code, it's making the site look pretty. So it's not necessarily stuff that's, it's more form over function. So you really want to keep your code to content ratio pretty equal, if not content heavy, if you're looking to improve how your site loads. How your code loads is also very important. And I'm sorry, a lot of this might not make sense to you if you're not the design person, but sit down, get an idea of how important this is, and get your site design person to come later and figure it out. You want to do what's called code deferring, which is you want your JavaScript and all that stuff loading at the bottom of your page. You want it placed at the bottom of your code so that it lets your content load, your images load, your menu load, as much of that stuff as possible before it hits the really heavy code that does all the, the makes it all pretty or gives you your forms or whatever. And the reason why is because at least as that code is loading, people have something to read. They have something to look at, because in your code, that content was called first. It was told to load by your browser first. So you can have all the content that goes, oh, this is what CSAE is about. Oh, yeah, there's this information about conference coming up, yada, yada. And what they don't know is that the browser has hit that code at the bottom of the page, and it's loading it, and it might be struggling because, it's a lot of code. But hey, they don't know because they're at the top of the page reading stuff. So that is also important. Let's see, what else can we talk about? Additional problems for speed issues are clean up your cascading style sheets. Cascading style sheets is the stuff that makes your page appear how it does. The different colors, the blocks around certain text, different fonts, all that stuff. This is done with CSS these days. Has been for years. But you want to have your CSS as much as possible in one place. You want it to be called from. So think of it, here's your website. Your CSS is kept here in a separate file. And your website is, whenever it wants something like a different font, a different color, something like that, it calls to your CSS file. And the CSS file says, this is how this part of your code should look. Now, if you don't have the CSS file separately, it does what's called inline CSS, which means each time you say you want a different font, each time you want a different color, you want it bold, you want italics, you want underlined, whatever you're doing, to change that standard text to something else, it writes that code onto the page itself. So think about how many times you see different fonts, bolding and all that stuff. All that stuff is written in there, and that code becomes padded and bloated and just keeps filling up, because every time you want that different color, you've got to use that color. You've got to insert that color's code in there. And that starts taking up space. And when it takes up space, it takes time for the browser to read it, and it takes longer to load. So you want to do what's called minifying your CSS, and you want to stop using inline CSS as much as possible. You want to put that out into your CSS file. And again, that might sound confusing, but tell your website design person, we need to get rid of as much inline CSS as possible, and they'll know what you're talking about. Another thing you want to do is you want to minimize the amount of external requests on a website. What this means is try and keep each page on your website as focused on a single purpose as possible. And a big design flaw, a big mistake that a lot of people say is they want to get as much information as possible on one website, on one page on your website. And this is especially true when you've got someone like a volunteer doing this for your association. You know, they're able to spend the time, but they might not have the website design experience or knowledge. So, you know, it's like, here's everything you need to know on one page, And what you're doing is, say you've got an events calendar page, and you just got a bunch of, I'm going out to this event and this event and this event, and say they're hosted locally, they're hosted on by a local provider. So you keep sending them to these different websites, and you're making multiple HTTP requests, which means you're communicating with different websites, or you're communicating with multiple databases, or something. Your web page is talking to a different location. Anything that does that takes time. Okay, not just because it's running the code for that request, but your website could be, razor sharp, really clean code, really fast, and it's serving up its information fast. But is the database you're sending them to doing the same thing? Is that external website you're sending them to doing the same thing? So if they're slow, because you've requested information from them, they're slowing down your website. Okay, because your website may be really fast, but it can only move as fast as that other website if you're talking to it. So you've got to make sure your databases are really lean and clean. You've got to make sure you get rid of as much bloat as possible when you're making these external HTTP requests. Otherwise, you're going to slow your site down. And also keep the requests to a minimum on each page. They can be those other servers could be going really fast, but if you're calling a lot of them, then you're going to slow down just on the basis of how many requests you're making. So keep that in mind. You want things fast, keep your HTTP requests down per page. And again, confusing, I know. Talk to the website design person. At this point, maybe you should just pause and go grab your website design person for your association and drag him down and sit him here and let's talk. There's also there's simple things like turn on your gzip compression. Might have to talk to your service provider, but it's very important. It can really pump up your speed if you've got your gzip compression on. There's other things like make sure that your meta description is there. It helps. These meta description, your robots.txt file, your sitemap. I know it's all crazy talk to the average person. They have no idea what I'm talking about, but these are things that help your site index faster. It helps serve your content faster. It helps browsers interact with your website faster, make better sense of it. So make sure your website design person has all of those things working. Make sure your URL is resolved. And what that means is, I'm sure at some point when you go to a website, like say CSAE, some people will type www.csae.com and some people type CSAE.com. Now you think that, for the average user, you think, well, it's all going to the same site, it's all the same thing. But it's not. It's what's called a resolved URL, which means that if you type either version, it'll take you to the same site. Okay? If your website is not resolved, www.csa.com and CSAE.com are actually indexed as two different sites, which means everything on your website is considered duplicate content. And it means you're kind of being weighed by Google twice. So if you're making mistakes on your website, your organization is going to get hit twice as much for those mistakes. So make sure your website resolve is fine. And now I'm going to say a lot of people are going to look at what I'm saying, and if you're following what I'm saying, you're going to say, well, this is, of course, this is all common sense, you know, website resolution. You know, what happens is if you resolve to CSAE.com, for example, someone types www.csa.com, then what actually happens is CSA.com comes up on the browser. If you can go to both www.csa.com and CSA.com, and it stays there in the URL line, like it doesn't change to one or the other, that means it's not resolved. So it's very easy to see if your website is resolved. Try both and see what happens. If both stay there after you've typed it, you've got an issue. It should automatically jump from one to the other. So as I was saying, if this all seems very confusing, but you're like, this is common sense, of course people sort this out. No. Before I came to CSA.com, I was freelancing, doing marketing and as well as website design. And I would say about 75% of the businesses that I did site audits for, which was going in and looking at their code from the audience's perspective. I would never have to get passwords, nothing like that. I would just go in as a user and then tear into their website to find what was wrong with it. And I'd say about 75%, if not more, of the websites I audited had massive, massive optimization problems. Everything from, like I said, not optimizing the images or scaling them to not resolving. I even found about 50% of websites had their Google indexing turned off, which means Google did not see the website unless somebody was following it, coming in from a link to somewhere else, someone say social media, because then Google would follow that link to the website. If you have Google indexing turned off, Google will not organically come to your website. It will not go there and look naturally. It has to follow from some other source to your website. It has to follow a link. And people just assume that, hey, Google indexing will be turned on, people can find my website. That's not true, especially if you're building your website with Weebly. Like you must see on Facebook, there's all these website building software platforms out there. If you build your website as you view it on your screen. Those services, although great for people who don't know how to do website design, then it's very easy to use and all that. They're really horrible from an optimization perspective, from a coding perspective, because to make it easy for you to drag that photo of yourself and put it wherever you want on the page and just go, haha, there's my website. For it to be able to do that, it has to have really bloated code that accounts for all these options that you want to do. It's not like when it's coded from scratch, or if it's coded using something like WordPress or something like that, where there's options to really just optimize it. You just get bloated, massive code, and a lot of them default Google indexing off. And because you're using that service because you're not familiar with web design, you have no idea where to go into settings to turn it on, or that you even should have to turn it on because you don't know web design. So you have to be really careful about the software you're using and what it's doing to your website. It'll just cause problems. Now, beyond what we've talked about so far, there's also things like open graph protocols. Make sure your website is using those. What open graph protocols does is it optimizes your website and standardizes your website for social media usage. Your open graph protocols basically is a part in your website's header that says, if someone shares this website, likes it, whatever, they take it, someone's visiting and they want to share your article, your blog article or whatever, or they want to share your event on their social media page so their network can enjoy it, which is something you obviously want to do. You want people to share your information. The Open Graph Protocol ensures that that page will be displayed in the social media how you want it to be. This is what sorry, we just bounced out there. The internet dropped for a second. The Open Graph, so as I was saying, the Open Graph Protocol is when you tweet a picture, when you tweet an article, and it takes the same picture and adds it as the picture for your tweet or your Facebook post. You know, when it automatically loads a picture into your social media, it's the Open Graph protocol that is telling it to use that picture or to use that title or to use that content, so that no matter who shares it, it'll always look the same. If you don't have Open Graph protocol and you've got a bunch of pictures, say you've got some pictures on your menu or you've got a banner picture, you might have to click through until you get the one you want. That's because you don't have the Open Graph protocol. So Open Graph protocol is very useful for optimizing your website with regards to how it relates to social media. And I guess that's about it for the broad overhead. There's a lot of stuff we can dig into for website optimization, but it really gets granular, it gets very technical. Even this broad overhead was it's very technical sounding, and that's because optimization is inherently technical. You can't talk about how to improve code without talking about coding. So I hope that everyone who's watching this or will watch it will say, you know, share this around to your web design people and say, hey, are we having these kind of problems? Even if you don't think you are, I guarantee you every website suffers from one of these problems, and it's really difficult, if not impossible, to get rid of them all. So it's a balancing act of dealing with the problems you can to get the best results that you're looking for, that best serves your outcome, and making do with the stuff that you can't really change without screwing other stuff up. Because that's the thing, it's usually a balancing act. If you fix this thing, it causes this problem. If you fix this problem, well, it causes this problem. So you really have to decide how best to optimize your website by digging into it and looking what you want to do and how best to serve your outcomes. Okay, so I'm going to leave to go get some lunch, and I'm going to say goodbye before the internet here at CSAE drops again. I hope this was useful. Please share this video with your website design people and other people in your network to let them know about CSAE's Conquering Content. Next Monday, I'll make an announcement about what we're going to talk about next week. Unless anybody asks any questions, please do so in the comments. Anything you want me to expand upon, anything else, new topic you want to hear. If not, I'll see you all next week for CSAE's Conquering Content. I am, again, Steve Trustroom, Manager Content here at CSAE. Have a good lunch, everybody, and have a good weekend.